Everyone, so today we're going to be talking about the Enneagram. If you don't know what the Enneagram is, it is a personality test and assessment that has grown in incredible popularity over the last several decades, and it's found its way into almost every facet of culture like business, education, and even counseling psychology, like I do. But if you are familiar with the Enneagram, then this video is really for you because we're going to be talking about some of the important things to know as you go through the Enneagram to really get the most out of it. So let's jump in. The first thing to know about the Enneagram is that it's really a personality explanation, not necessarily a personality test. So with a lot of personality assessments, you get things like your strengths, your weaknesses, the what and the how and the where of your personality. But what makes the Enneagram unique is that it really gets into the why, that driving force deep inside of you that impacts everything from your relationship to your career to your worldview and perspective on purpose and meaning. And so what's so profound about the Enneagram is that it really gets more into the why and not necessarily the what or the how or the where like a lot of other personality tests do. And because of that, one thing to know about the Enneagram is that it really is best done kind of reading through all the numbers rather than taking a test to find out your number. Now, I don't know if Enneagram experts would say that it's not good to take a test to understand your Enneagram number, but in my personal experience, tests oftentimes pick on the biases and pick on the ways we're trying to project ourselves and can oftentimes give us answers that don't really reflect or represent who we are or what we actually feel and see and believe about the world. And so reading through the numbers, whether that's a book on it, or whether that's websites like the Enneagram Institute, and really taking the time to kind of get through all of them is actually one of the more effective ways to kind of find out your true number rather than a test which can sometimes kind of miss the mark. The next thing to know about the Enneagram is that it's considered taboo in Enneagram tradition to kind of let yourself be typed by others or to type others. And it makes sense if you think about it because with the Enneagram, you're really getting into some of the intimate and deep parts of who someone is. And so to kind of call out someone's number or let someone kind of call out yours would be comparable to saying, hey, I think the deepest part of who you are is that you care too much what people think and you spend a lot of time focusing on your appearance. Not only would that be awkward, but it would also be really rude and kind of hurtful, which is why the Enneagram tradition kind of shies away from typing others or kind of letting yourself be typed and actually really emphasizing the individual going on a journey, a sacred journey to kind of understand their number for themselves. Next on the Enneagram is to know that you should probably be a little older when you take it. A lot of the Enneagram experts agree that the Enneagram is really profound because it gets into the why of your inner world, of your psychology. But one thing to know about the why is that you don't really figure it out until you're usually in your 20s or early 30s. And again, if you think about this, it makes sense because teenagers and even older teenagers and early 20-somethings are oftentimes still trying to figure out who they are, oftentimes kind of changing their identity, kind of like they change clothes or they change sizes in shoes. I've met a lot of young people who one year are a world traveler, the next year want to be a musician, the year after that want to be a business person. And it takes some time. It takes us some time to kind of really figure out who we are, why we do what we do. And that's when the Enneagram really comes in and can be most helpful. That's not to say that the Enneagram is useless before you're in your 20s or early 30s. But again, to really help individuals understand the inner workings of who they are, being a little older before you take it is oftentimes a helpful thing. Next to know on the Enneagram is that people oftentimes experience some confusion when they're kind of going through it because they'll think to themselves, boy, I have a lot in common with that number. I have a lot in common with this number. What's going on here? Am I like more than one number? Well, here's one thing to know about the Enneagram. What makes the Enneagram so unique is that it has the core number that represents who you really are. But then it has two wings. And the wings you can think of as elements of your personality that contextualize the main part of who you are. So for instance, if you have a 1 who's with a wing 8, they could be caring a lot about right and wrong in the world, which is what a 1 does, but they could do it in a very aggressive way, which is what an 8 does. But if you have a 1 who's a wing 2, they could care a lot about what's right and wrong in the world, but they do it in a very socially polite and caring and loving way, a lot like a 2 does, who is the personality that tends to emphasize a lot of the social spectrums of a personality. With that, though, you also have 2 more numbers that you go to when you're growing and you go to when you're stressed. So what that means is, in total, every individual can actually have 5 numbers that they kind of bounce around through, depending on the season of their life. So again, it's not uncommon when reading the Enneagram to be like, oh, I have a little bit of that number, I have a little bit of that number, because in all honesty, you actually have 5 numbers you could be bouncing around in any given season. Next to know in the Enneagram is that it really does have a rich spiritual tradition. Now, that's not to say you can't get anything out of the Enneagram by kind of keeping spirituality out of it, but the Enneagram is really built on this premise that you have a false or fake version of yourself that you have used to kind of get through life, that you have used to get the job you have, to get the relationships you have, and to get the love and the acceptance you have. And so with that premise, the Enneagram is really helping you to say, this is the false version, this is kind of the fake version, this is kind of the broken version of yourself. Let's push you more into who you really are. And because that's the premise of the Enneagram, that's where the idea of the higher power comes in. A really great quote that kind of captures this concept is what Albert Einstein, I think, said, and I'm probably butchering this quote: you can't really invent a solution in the brain that created the problem. And that's where we begin to understand why the higher power is so important, because it's pretty dangerous to think that the brain that kind of led you to the very issues and challenges you have could actually be the brain that creates the new and better version of yourself. In fact, a lot of people get into trouble because they're trying to use the same brain, the same methods, the same tactics that kind of led them to their issues to kind of create a new version of themselves and a new solution for their life, which is why the idea of the higher power is so emphasized with the Enneagram, because it's really saying, hey, we think you need a higher power to actually figure out who you are. We think you need a higher power to actually help you figure out the true version of yourself, because you, in your best thinking, got yourself to where you are. So why not incorporate someone else's thinking, in this case, a higher power, to help you get to where you want to be. The last thing to know about the Enneagram is that you can have 2 numbers who look very different. And this can be very surprising for a lot of people who maybe find their number and they kind of think that the Enneagram's like the Myers-Briggs. Oh, we're the same number, so we're going to be the same kind of person. But the truth is, the Enneagram, because it gets more into the why, actually can create a lot of situations where people are the same number, but they're both very different. And so let me give you an example. If you have 2 1s, which are individuals who care a lot about right and wrong, you could have a 1 who's a Southern Baptist preacher who thinks that what's wrong with America is that there's not enough biblical literacy, and that the right thing to do for America is we need to build churches on every corner. But then you could also have a 1 who's a terrorist, who thinks what's wrong with the world are things like religion and things like America. And what needs to happen is that people need to be killed and systems need to be brought down. And that's what's going to make things better in the world. Now, what's interesting is that both these people are 1s, but they go about it in very different ways. And this is not uncommon with the Enneagram, because even 2 numbers who look very similar can have very different ways to kind of go about expressing it, very different ways to kind of go about living it out. And so if you're experiencing that as you kind of learn the Enneagram, don't worry, that happens, and is not uncommon. One little caveat to add at the very end here is, if you genuinely feel like you don't really know which number you are on the Enneagram, it's most likely because you're a 9. And 9s are a personality on the Enneagram that you can kind of think of like a chameleon. You can kind of think of like a gecko. They actually can possess all parts of the Enneagram. And that may sound kind of fun or interesting. Wow, maybe I want to be a 9. But actually, that's the 9's biggest issue, is that they know how to fit in and be everything to all people, but they don't actually know who they are. And that's one of the biggest things that can plague their existence and plague their life. And so if you've been experiencing that with the Enneagram, I would really think about the 9 number, because it's possible that may be what you are. So thanks for watching this video on the Enneagram. I hope it helps you as you kind of go through it and get the most out of it. And please feel free to share this with anybody who's kind of going through the Enneagram themselves and kind of wants to get the most out of it and wants to do it as well as possible. And I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you next time.